Story 1. My grandfather used to walk into his bedroom to blow his nose, then secretly take a bicycle horn from his closet and honk it. My cousins and I all thought that was how it sounded. I begged him to come to my class for show and tell. He declined, and I still did not figure it out for years. Story 2. Some zoo or theme park tickets do not include access to the gift shop. Story 3. My grandmother claimed she could tell when I was lying by a red line on my forehead. I swear, every time I checked in the mirror it was there. It only clicked in my 20s when I realized that whenever she accused me of lying, she would drag her fingernail across my forehead to reveal the red line. Story 4. Rumble strips on the side of the road aren't for blind drivers. Story 5. I am not allergic to coconut. They just did not want to share. Story 6. My parents took me to the Disney store at the mall and told me it was Disneyland. Story 7. The car will not start unless the seatbelts are buckled. Story 8. Getting told off for exaggerating. You should not exaggerate. My dad used to say he must have told you 1,000,000 times that we do not exaggerate in this family. I did not realize it was his inside joke until I was an adult. Story 9. My dad told me once when I was little that puppies came from flowers. He probably said it just to shut me up about asking for a dog. 4 years after that, I kept an eye out for puppy seeds whenever I went to Home Depot, but I had no luck. Admittedly, I was probably in 8th or 9th grade when it finally clicked that they obviously did not come from flowers. I wasn't an adult, but I was way too old to believe it. Story 10. I have a pretty unique last name, so I never had a middle name. When I was a kid, I asked my parents why, and they told me they couldn't afford to give me a middle name because you had to pay for each letter. I have a short first name, and I believed them until my daughter was born. The nurse gave me a form to fill out with my daughter's name, and I asked her how much. She looked confused and asked how much what, and in that moment I realized my dad had been joking. Story 11. When I wiped my nose upward with a sleeve or tissue, I thought my nostrils would turn inside out and that I would drown if it rained. Apparently my dad's brother had this happen to him and had small weights implanted in his nostrils so they would sit normally. I believed it completely for a year. I was about 6. Story 12. I always thought there were so many skunks at our campsites when I was a child. Story 13. I was embarrassed about this until I became a teenager, but here goes. My father, who was a lawyer, told me with a totally straight face and a high degree of detail that every year dozens of people are killed on theme park rides, but it could not be reported by the media because the government put a defense notice on the whole thing, and the families were just paid out and forced to remain silent about it all. He told me when I was about 10, and I repeated it to who knows how many credulous kids until, as a teenager, someone finally called it out as nonsense. When I told my dad, "Nice joke. You had me believing that for years and I made a fool of myself at school," he cracked up in tears of laughter and said he had forgotten ever telling me that in the first place. Story 14. The ice cream van bells meant they had no ice cream. I found out it was a lie when I was about 14. Story 15. Whenever I asked my dad how he knew a random fact, skill, or the answer to any question, he would say, "I went to daddy's school." It made complete sense to me that there would be a school to teach dads how to be dads. It turns out it does not exist, but we still refer to daddy school every now and then. Story 16. It was not exactly a lie, since he truly believed it, but my dad always told me that the eyeball monster in Pan's Labyrinth was David Bowie. I believed him and told others. He must have confused it with the labyrinth, but I don't know why he specifically thought Bowie was the eyeball character. Story 17. You cannot turn on the car's interior roof lights, or you will go to jail. Story 18. My eldest is 13. They and their siblings believe that Bob is short for Bobbert. I will not tell them otherwise. Story 19. My mom told me Chuck E. Cheese was only open for birthdays. If it is not your birthday and you have not been invited, they will not let you in. She is a brilliant lady, and I am co-opting the lie when I have kids. Story 20. I was told I was allergic to cats. To be fair, I did have a severe allergic reaction, full body hives, after petting a relative's cat, but it was also right after I had been put on a new antibiotic. We eventually discovered I am allergic to sulfa drugs, But my mother kept the myth that I was also allergic to cats. She did not like them and did not want me to ask for one. She is not the most reality-based person, so I think she genuinely convinced herself it was true. As a teenager, I gave in to temptation and began petting the cats at the barn where I took horseback riding lessons. I gradually petted and held them, and nothing happened. I have had cats in my home for about 25 years now with no hives. Story 21. The cable didn't reach our house. For context, this was the mid-1980s. The neighbors 2 houses down had cable. That's where we went to watch Fraggle Rock. But my parents said that was where the cable stopped. We apparently lived on a cable-free island in the middle of the neighborhood. I had that wait a minute epiphany only about 10 years ago. Story 22. They said that college is only for rich people and that I should just be a secretary. I had a full scholarship, but my parents would not fill out the free application for federal student aid so I could get it. I went to college part-time while I worked. I graduated magna cum laude after 20 years, and they did not come to my graduation. I have a successful career now. Story 23. If your shoes are untied on an escalator, you could get caught and someone might have to pull you free. I'm still scared of escalators. Story 24. Do not watch too much television, or your eyes will turn square. Check the mirror to see if they are turning square. Story 25. Oh, I'm so going to win this thread. If this is what winning is. My parents told me my entire childhood that Kansas was black and white, like the Wizard of Oz. Because I loved, and still love, my parents, I went along with it. Kansas is black and white because of their views and allegory. As I got older, I asked lots of questions about this. A friend moved to our city from Kansas. They got to him before I did. Oh, it's so nice to be in color, he said. They even went on a road trip through Kansas and literally changed the film to black and white. When they showed me the pictures from their trip, suddenly everything was black and white. What the fuck is this? I asked. They had to tell me the truth when I started asking really smart questions like, what happens when you fly over Kansas? They didn't want me to embarrass myself in front of my peers. I love my parents, but I genuinely believe they had children just to fuck with them. Story 26. So there is a band called The Killers, and their most famous song is Mr. Brightside. You have probably heard it before even if you do not know the name or the band. It was my favorite song growing up, and my parents always called it the Chelsea song because my name is Chelsea, and they thought the chorus started, Chelsea, turning saints into the sea. I always felt a special connection to the song. They have been my favorite band since I first listened to Battleborn as a teen and rediscovered them. When I was 20, I told my friends that Mr. Brightside was always my favorite because I thought it had my name in it. After laughing for a long time, they told me the lyric is jealousy, not Chelsea, and that my parents had been tricking me. The band and the song still hold a deep place in my heart, but damn. Story 27. We had rules for checkers about double jumping and super kings that I did not realize were just house rules until I played a partner in my mid-20s. I felt so dumb. Story 28. My mom was an immigrant and mispronounced pomegranates. I told people at school that pomegranates were my favorite fruit, and my teachers were very concerned. Story 29. More shameful than embarrassing. I grew up in a white nationalist cult called Christian Identity. Think the Weaver family at Ruby Ridge. I received a lot of racist and anti-Semitic indoctrination, on top of many unrelated conspiracy theories. I escaped by fleeing the state as a runaway teenager in the late 1990s. I am older now, but I still do not know whether I have completely shaken off all the shameful beliefs I was raised with. I do a lot of self-examination. The path to improvement was meeting people who modeled kindness and empathy in ways that were new to me. It is so important to nurture one another's better natures. Story 30. Our Easter chicks eventually went to live on a farm in the countryside and had a happy life. This still troubles me 60 years later. Our pregnant cat was boarded at the veterinarian while we went on vacation, and we never got her back. I could never get an answer from my parents about where she was. I believe they had her euthanized and assumed we would forget about her. I am still upset. Story 31. My dad told me he could make the traffic lights turn green when he snapped his fingers. He did it about 10 times in a row. I believed him until I grew up and learned about time traffic lights. It was a very sweet memory. Story 32. We had a great puppy named Butterball, but we were poor. After a few months, my mom told me the dog had gone to live with a nice family who had lots of land for him to run around. With a story like that, I believed he had died and I was very sad. I was nearly 30 when it finally came up. My mom told me she had rehomed Butterball to some family friends who could afford to take care of him, and that a dog I had met several years later while visiting them was Butterball in his adult form, renamed by his new family. Story 33. If you go down my history a bit, you will find me discovering that lie bumps are not karma for lying. They are inflamed taste buds. Story 34. Is someone going to jump me from the trees if I play nearby after sundown? I don't know, though. I still believe it. Story 35. When the movie is over, you're supposed to leave your popcorn and trash on the floor. Story 36. For some insane reason my parents told me Morris dancing, an English folk dance, was illegal. They told me at a very formative age and I stored that in my long-term memory as an absolute fact. You do not often come across Morris dancing in the UK. It is a dying art, but any time I did I thought, oh no, I hope the police do not see them. I held this belief until I was about 20. Story 37. I was the parent in this scenario. We were driving through the mountains of western Pennsylvania. I told my children they had to be quiet if they wanted to see deer along the road. It worked for a few years. Story 38. I know it is not actually bad luck, but I still salute a single magpie because of the old rhyme I was told as a child in England. Story 39. Not my story, but my cousin's. My aunt told him that the proper way to drink soda was to pour it out and microwave it. Needless to say, as a kid he never asked for soda. After moving into university dorm life, though, he discovered the truth. Story 40. This is very specific, but as a child I remember watching the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster on television. This was back in 2003 and I was about 5.5 to 6 years old. I remember that week at school people were talking about the astronauts returning from space, so we were excited to watch their return on the television. When we watched it disintegrate, we all started freaking out. My mother turned off the television, said it was old footage from the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in the 1980s and not to worry, then sent us outside. Later that week, at my grandmother's, I asked about it and she again said there had been no disaster that weekend and that I must be thinking of the Challenger in the 1980s. I forgot about it for years. It was not something we covered in school as history, perhaps because it was so recent and none of my friends mentioned it. A few years ago, while scrolling TikTok, I saw footage of the Columbia disaster from 2003. I was living with my grandmother at the time and ran into the living room to tell her I had not misremembered it. She brushed it off, saying, "Yes, we told you that so you would calm down. You were hysterical." Story 41. I thought our pool turned red if someone peed in it. I was about 20 when I finally realized. Laughing out loud. Story 42. When I was a kid and had trouble falling asleep, I would ask my parents for my sleepy medicine. They would take a long time to bring it, but if I was still awake, they would give it to me. When I got older, I understood they were waiting for me to fall asleep naturally. The biggest shock of my life came when I was 17 and my parents casually mentioned that they had faked the sleepy medicine. My mother mixed sugar with water when she made it. My father mixed salt with water. They never told each other what the fake sleepy medicine was. If I asked why it tasted different, they would say it was a different brand. I had been given a placebo that made me fall asleep. Story 43. My mother, a strong feminist, renamed characters in books and changed their genders so there were more strong female characters. She also called the lazy Susan in our kitchen Lazy Larry. I was mortified as a late teenager to learn it was actually called a lazy Susan. Story 44. If I tried to give my baby up for adoption, the state would simply ask whether they wanted the child and then they would throw me out. They ruined both our lives. Story 45. I have an artsy clock with no numbers or markings. I taught my children to tell time with a regular clock, not a digital one, and convinced them they would see the numbers on this clock when older. After they learned, I asked them for the time and they looked at the clock and answered accurately. They were teenagers before they realized they could see the numbers all along. Story 46. Everyone who writes a book is automatically given the title doctor. I was 4 or 5 years old and my family was watching a talk show that had Dr. Joyce Brothers as a guest. For younger listeners, in the 1970s there was a law that Dr. Joyce Brothers had to be on every talk show all the time. Someone asked what kind of doctor she was. My dad, very sarcastically, said that anyone who writes a book is called a doctor. Not understanding sarcasm at the time, I took it as fact. When I was 12 or 13, I was looking around our school library and finally thought to ask myself the incredibly obvious question. If everyone who writes a book is automatically a doctor, then why is the author of every book not listed as Dr. Whoever? Story 47. Public pools add a chemical to the water that changes color when someone urinates. Story 48. Not a lie. Growing up in our house, we called over-easy eggs juicy eggs. Tell me why I thought that was a universal term until I was 28 years old, when I ordered juicy eggs in a restaurant. The waitress thought I was crazy. My dad had to jump in and say, "She means over easy." Story 49. Drinking while driving is fine. People are just uptight assholes. Putting a vinyl wrap that says Pepsi and looks like a real soda on your car, and showing it to people while you're driving, is hilarious and clever. When you do it to a police car, you're totally winning at life. Just be careful when you have a kid in the back seat. Swap the vinyl wrap for a fresh Budweiser, because uptight people don't get the joke. Also, this car never had seat belts. Not all cars do. Story 50. Not so much a lie as an omission. I was in my 20s at a friend's house for dinner, where I was completely distracted by the Wizard of Oz they had playing for the kids. I grew up with black and white television and never knew Oz was in color. Story 51. The claim that my grandmother, who was white and from an all-white family, was part Cherokee is false, and the same is true for yours. Laughing out loud. Story 52. My boyfriend once thought that French people defecate standing up because of a joke his father made while they were driving through France when he was a child. Story 53. My mom told me that if the headlights were on while driving, we would be instantly pulled over and arrested. I believed it for far too long. The first time I mentioned it in front of other people as a teenager, everyone laughed and I wanted to disappear. Turns out it is just annoying, not illegal. Story 54. When I was little, we visited my Nana once a year in eastern Pennsylvania and always passed the Caterpillar factory in York on the way. My dad convinced me it was where caterpillars were created. When I was 22, driving alone to my Nana's funeral, I passed the Caterpillar factory again and realized that, in fact, that's not where caterpillars come from. Story 55. Not me, but my friend's mother told her that figs only grow every 5 years because she really liked them. At the time, they were very expensive and remain fairly pricey now. She eventually got a part-time university job in a fruit shop with predictable results. Story 56. She claimed that I did not like Cookie Crisp. My mother said she bought it once and I did not like it. I was a fully grown adult before I realized there was no way that was true. Story 57. When I was a child, I believed my American father had been in the Japanese military. Later, when I mentioned this in front of other adults, my mother laughed and corrected me. My father had served in the United States Marine Corps and was stationed in Japan. You can see how a child might conclude he had been in the Japanese military. Anyway, that was the story I thought of when I read the prompt, even if it does not fit completely. Story 58. I had a coworker whose father turned a silly joke into a long-term lie. Once, to get his children to quiet down, he told them there was a submarine race nearby. Of course, since all the boats were underwater, there was nothing to see. Still, the children quieted and scanned the surface for a while. Later, his parents turned the ruse into a running joke. Whenever they wanted to go do something fun without the children, they would say they were going to watch the submarine races. The children were happy to skip what they considered a boring event, and their parents enjoyed an evening on their own. Story 59. There is no such thing as a military school for children in Canada. When I was a child and misbehaved, my parents threatened to send me to military school because I had seen one in an American movie. They really emphasized the myth, getting up at 5 a.m. every morning, including weekends. being served nothing but spinach for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and wearing uncomfortable uniforms every day that felt like sandpaper. Years later, I looked on the internet and discovered there never was such a school. There are private schools that imitate a military upbringing, but my parents could not have afforded them. Story 60. While a good night's sleep is important, sleeping between 10 p.m. and midnight is especially important. Age 7. Oh no, I had better get to bed if I am going to be asleep by 10 p.m. Age 17. Wait a minute. Story 61. My dad always called canned crescent rolls croissants. The first time I went to France, I got a croissant and thought it was gross. Tasted nothing like the ones I had been eating at home. Now I know better and absolutely love a good authentic croissant. Story 62. If there are cows, we are in Texas. Even in the middle of Georgia, people would see cows and insist we were in Texas. I believed that until the 4th grade. Story 63. Never using credit means you are financially responsible. Story 64. You can't shave above your knees because the skin is different, and you'll get razor burn. Story 65. My dad told me pumice was whale poo. I whipped out that fun fact at a social gathering in my 20s. Story 66. It wasn't my parents. It was my older sister. She told me that the Hostess cupcakes with the squiggly frosting were our names in cursive. I remember picking through them to find my name. Many years later, as I wondered why they stopped making personalized cupcakes, I realized I had been lied to. Story 67. My mom was allergic to cold water. She just didn't want to get in the pool with us. Story 68. My mother told me Sir Graves Ghastly and Bozo the Clown were brothers. To understand that, you would have to be at least Generation X and from the Detroit area. I was obsessed with Bozo as a child. I watched his show, colored his books, and slept with his doll. He was my childhood comfort and coping mechanism. Sir Graves was a local horror movie host in the 1970s and 1980s. He dressed like a vampire and lived in a graveyard. It was all campy comedy, but as a child he scared me. My mother would sometimes watch his show on Saturday afternoons, and to keep me from being afraid she told me he was Bozo's brother. Since every major city had its own Bozo and Sir Graves was a local personality, I believed it. The actor who played Bozo in Detroit was the brother of the actor who played Sir Graves. I told anyone who mentioned either character. I was in my mid-30s, probably relating this little-known fact to someone. When it finally hit me, my mother had lied. Story 69. Racism. I was raised to believe white people were better. Well, that's bullshit. I'm not passing that on. Story 70. In Greece, there are small roadside shrines on almost every road, often several on curves. When I asked about them as a child, my mother told me they marked places where people had road accidents and were put up to thank a saint for their survival. I realized that only half of that statement was true a few years later. Story 71. The shower doesn't warm up if you're not standing in it. I thought it was a pressure sensor in the floor. When I was a kid, I took little baths, and one of my parents told me it wouldn't heat up. I didn't even try until high school because my lunch table was laughing at me. I told my friend she was lucky she could preheat her shower. For me, you had to stand and wait for the water to warm. They teased me. Here's the thing. I never tried before then because I thought it would be hard on the old shower and house, so I assumed it was just how things worked. My mom laughed at me too when I got home and asked her about it. So you've been just standing in cold water this entire time? Ha! You said it wouldn't heat up, girl. I don't know. She giggled and said, yeah, no, you can wait for it to heat up. Great day. Story 72. Work hard and excel in school. It is the key to success in life. Story 73. When you drove by a plant or factory billowing smoke or steam into the air, you thought that was how clouds were made. Story 74. Speaking on behalf of my mom, I can say she thought the Inuit were magical creatures similar to fairies until she was about 16. Story 75. My dad said that if I pressed the hazard lights in the car would explode. I still get a little nervous when I need to use them. Story 76. We had a fake balcony I really wanted to access through my bedroom window. My father told us that we could not remove the window screens because it is the law. Story 77. Gravity makes all the nutrients go to the bottom of the banana, so you have to eat the whole thing. The last bite is the healthiest. That is an embarrassing revelation to have at age 24. Story 78. When you have to pee at an inconvenient time, like in the car or at a mall far from a restroom, just think about Christmas, was my mom's response every time. It became the go-to phrase for my sister and me. I had no idea this wasn't a typical response to someone saying, "I have to pee," until I was in college when I casually used the line at a party. No one had any idea what I was talking about. I'll give my mom credit. Confusing and distracting someone is a great way to buy 5 minutes of reprieve. But the way that one phrase rolled off her tongue for decades made it seem like a 3 strikes, you're out kind of situation for Americans and baseball fans. Story 79. Brown chicken eggs are fertilized. To be fair, I think they believed it too. Story 80. I believed well into adulthood that if I went swimming without waiting 30 minutes after eating, I would get cramps and drown. I also believed cracking my knuckles as a kid would give me arthritis as an adult. Story 81. It wasn't my parents, but my older siblings. They told me bacon bits were made of worms. Being naive and gullible, I believed them until my 20s, when I finally questioned it. Story 82. When I was 5, I asked my dad what the bumps in the road were, and he replied, "That's how blind people drive." I think I was 11 when I told a friend that, and he looked at me like I was a total idiot. Story 83. My parents told me that if I swallowed gum, it would stay in my stomach for 7 years. Story 84. You are the man of the house now. I was not told to get a job. This is how I took on the responsibility. In 1970, I was 11 years old and in the 6th grade, working 40 hours a week at $5 an hour. I paid rent and bought groceries while my father was incarcerated. I helped my mother and supported my 5 siblings for 10 years. Story 85. I lived in a small town that had a relatively high number of fairs. When one happened, my stepfather would say, "They have a fair here every time a cow calves." For years I believed him and even wondered how that would work in cities. I was a dumb kid. Story 86. A friend's dad convinced us all his car had a nitrous oxide system button. In reality, he had a broken heater button, and he would floor the gas when he pressed it. Story 87. I thought everyone had visual snow because my mom said so. As an adult, I asked her about that, and she said she wasn't paying attention when I first asked. Story 88. That thunder is the sound of clouds crashing together. I was 34 when my sister finally set me straight. We still laugh about it. Story 89. There are special mountain cows with shorter legs on one side so they can stand upright and do not slide down the slope. My dad told me this on a vacation to Austria. I believed it for several years until he started telling me there were also mountain chickens. To this day, he makes fun of me for believing him. I was about 5 and had no reason not to trust my dad. Something fundamentally changed when I found out it was all just a joke and he would laugh about my gullibility behind my back. That made me determined to never lie to my son and never make fun of him for not knowing something. I want to raise him with a mindset of curiosity and wonder. I hope he will always trust me enough to ask whatever question is on his mind. If I do not know the answer, we will look it up and learn together. Story 90. My mother said she had sex only 3 times in her life. I have 2 sisters. This was part of the "you are going to the burning place if you have sex" talk. Story 91. Do not watch a dog defecate or you may get a sty in your eye. Story 92. I always heard how rough Dad had it in the army, but the details were extremely vague. They seemed to center around there being lots of bugs at Fort Sill and how many people with Dad's job died in the Korean War. Dad was very upset when I went into the army. My parents were divorced by then. Years later, my husband got a membership to Ancestry and we researched Dad's side of the family. We learned that Dad never completed his 2 years. He lasted 9 months. Story 93. My family and I went to the Special Olympics when I was in elementary school. During the opening ceremony, 2 people parachuted down into the stadium from an airplane. My dad told me it was Bill and Hillary Clinton. Years later, when I tried to repeat the story as a young adult, I realized my dad had been joking. It was very much in line with his sense of humor. Story 94. If I tell them the truth, they promise they will not become angry. Story 95. I thought you had to apply the brakes to start a car. Not the clutch, it was an automatic. I was about 25 years old, and my roommate leaned in and turned the key. I was in the passenger seat and said, "Wait, how the hell did you do that?" He just stared. Story 96. You cannot buy 17 magazine unless you are at least 17 years old. Story 97. My mother-in-law told her son the factories in Cedar Rapids were cloud factories and that the smoke pouring from them made clouds. When he was 16, I was in the car with him and he realized it was not true. It was like watching a child discover there is no Easter Bunny in real time. It was wild to watch. Story 98. My parents had a running gag that we would be weighed individually when we passed the weighing stations on the highway. They happened to be closed, and my sister and I believed it until we were teenagers. Story 99. I am not a parent but a teacher. When I was in 3rd grade, a teacher told me you needed a license to use a pen as an adult. I recently realized I did not have one and went to look it up. She simply did not want us writing with something that could not be erased. I am going to be 20 soon and did not question anything because why would my teacher lie? Story 100. Anyone else need a meat and potato shot if you did not eat your dinner? Story 101. If you touch your belly button, you will die. I now have an irrational fear of them as an adult. Story 102. The fish can hear. You have to be quiet or they won't bite. Story 103. My older sister, who was 5 years older than me, told me when I was a small child that until I was 12, all my sins counted as my parents' sins on their record with God. I was very careful. It wasn't until I was 16 that I realized it was nonsense. Story 104. When we were children, our single, overwhelmed mother told us she had a heart defect and that we would kill her if we misbehaved or made her upset. 20 to 25 years later, after many years of therapy, our relationship with her was good and healthy. It turned out she had a heart defect that could have been fatal at any time. She had surgery and everything is okay now. The irony is striking. Story 105. I wanted singing lessons when I was 8. My mom put me in piano, insisting I needed it before I could start singing. I did piano for about 5 years, but the singing lessons never happened. I was complaining to my husband while we were imagining having children and the extracurricular activities they might want to do. I realized at 36 that I was never going to get those singing lessons because no one in our family can carry a tune in a bucket. Story 106. My uncle told me there was a monster living in the toilet that would grab children. So I put my hands on the seat and hovered my buttocks over the toilet for years. This was not during adulthood or even my teenage years. It lasted at least 4 to 5 years of my childhood. Story 107. You don't have to wipe if you're going to shower. I suppose you were too poor for toilet paper that day. Story 108. It wasn't me, but my cousin came over for a steak barbecue. I finished my steak and left the gristle on the side. My cousin said I wasn't finished and that their mother had told them gristle is brain food. I said no, it's not, and that I was done. They insisted their mother had told them it was good for the brain and that they always had to eat it at home. The rest of my family joined the conversation and agreed with me. My cousin called their mother, who admitted she had said that only to make them eat and stop complaining about the chewiness. After talking to her, my cousin returned and finished the steak, still leaving the gristle. Story 109. This might be dark. But my aunt used to say she had eyes in the back of her head. A few years later, she developed cancer, began chemotherapy, and lost her hair. I never saw eyes on the back of her head. Rest easy, Aunt Lori. Story 110. Do you know how many people I told that Braveheart was filmed in 2 weeks? Story 111. I asked my dad what the red triangle button in the car was for, and he responded, "Don't push it or the car will blow up." I was terrified for years until the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Why would they install a button like that? Story 112. Not a lie, just misinformation. I thought menopause was when your uterus fell out. I was 30 when I found out that it does not. I was born with a vagina. Story 113. I was told I was allergic to butterscotch. I choked on a butterscotch from my grandmother's candy bowl when I was 3 or 4 years old. My family told me I was allergic, so I would not eat them anymore. For years, I told people I was allergic and declined butterscotch, until in my early 20s I realized there was no way I was allergic to butterscotch. Oddly, I always remembered the choking incident even though I was very young. I realized my allergy coincided with the memory of my dad sticking his fingers down my throat to remove the candy and vomiting everywhere. Story 114. The numbers on golf balls indicate the quality of the ball. I embarrassed myself in front of my boss. Story 115. They said my anxiety, depression, and eating disorder were lies, that I was lazy, and that I was sick in the head. Story 116. My mom told me that when you start using deodorant, your body adapts to it and you have to keep using it. Because I already smelled bad, I had to steal my first few deodorants since I was not allowed to have any. Story 117. My dad called it Farmer John cheese, and when I was about 16 and at a friend's house eating dinner, I asked them to please pass the Farmer John. It was embarrassing to learn it was Parmesan. Story 118. The police will pull you over if you turn the car lights on. As a kid, I read 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Story 119. People who are not white are bad. Religion is good. Of course, it didn't take me until adulthood to realize this. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.